Street is where my heart and soul reside.
Thanks for riding along with us as we explore another trail somewhere west of Wall Street. Today we're in Buffalo Gap, Texas, with the internationally acclaimed chef Tom Perini at the world-famous Perini Ranch Steakhouse. Somewhere West of Wall Street is brought to you by our friends at... I'm so proud to introduce you folks to a very dear friend of mine. And I told you a while ago he was internationally famous. And he is, because Tom's been all over the world, cooked for all kinds of folks, and he is internationally acclaimed. Tom, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I'm thrilled that you're here. I look forward to this, and we're going to have a good time.
Yes, we are. I want to start off with talking about your youth and how you grew up. And so we'll know what motivated you to learn to be a cook and get in this business.
Grew up in Abilene. My father was from Denver, geologist, and my mother was from Chicago. And so, you know, I describe it as an Ozzie and Harriet type situation. It was before TV, we had breakfast together, we had our evening meal together, and it was a very nice situation. And so grew up here, went to school here, except for a short stint where I went to a military school, which I've never understood why. But went to the military school and ended up in Dallas, and my father passed away. And we had this ranch. They had bought this ranch in '52. And so as a kid, I'd grown up out here and knew some things about ranching, but my mother called and said, come home, which I did. And I really didn't I didn't know what I wanted to do, but ranching was kind of a natural thing for me to happen. And so, because in the early days, I had grown up at different ranches, around ranches like Lamb's Head in Albany and different ranches, so I understood the kind of the culture of it. So I bought my first cattle in '65. Which was a learning experience, I might add. And actually did that for 18 years. During this time period, though, I was leasing country and buying cattle, and as you know, ranching is a wonderful lifestyle, but it's a tough business. Yes. You can do everything right, and still, if weather or bugs or whatever happens, you're in trouble. Yes. So it was a tough go, but in the ranching end of it, I found myself drifting more into the food business. You can buy the best horse, the best equipment, the best hats, spurs, etc., but that does not make you a cowboy. You might look like one or think you look like one, but to be a cowboy, you really have to have cow sense and be around it and understand cattle, and I didn't have that. So it was a challenge for me to do this, and I learned after years to do it. But so I started, we had a chuck wagon, and I'd go out and start cooking on the chuck wagon. We'd do a morning drive, and I'd go out and at lunch go in and fix lunch and start doing that. And then some of the big ranches started asking me to come over, because at that time there were not many chuck wagons out. So we'd go out and cook for the Swinsons or the Sixes, and we'd go up and cook, and they'd supply the beef, and I'd cook, and everything was happy, and it worked. And so that was really my first experience in cooking, was learning how to cook that way, and I've always enjoyed cooking. So it was '82, I went and talked to my dear friend Watt Matthews, who was my mentor. I told him, I said, Watt, I'm having a hard time making this work. I said, you know, my bank note's staying the same, and I'm existing year to year, but it's a kind of a hard deal to do. And Watt laughed, and he said, do you have any oil well pump jacks? And I said, no. And he said, well, he'd found the best cross with cattle was the good Hereford cow, and an oil well pump jack made it work. And I said, no, I didn't. And we laughed, and he said, well, I think you ought to sell out, Tom. And I really didn't want to do that, because that meant I had to pay the bank back. And I thought, well, maybe I can make this thing work a little farther. And he stopped and he said, you know, you can do more for the beef industry by cooking it than you can by raising it. And he said, I think you ought to get into the restaurant business. And I said, what? And I'm gonna try it. And that's what I did. I sold out in '82 and opened this restaurant in '83. And the thing Watt did not tell me was that I needed 1 or 2 oil well or pump jacks to make this work for the first 12 years. But it's worked. It was great advice, and I'm still involved with agriculture, which I love, and people in this business and everything that goes along with it. I have been able to do that through the Steakhouse.
Well, you know, you were talking about the chuck wagon, and in the early days, before pickups and trailers, you know, the wagon would go out, and some places stayed out 12 months a year. And the cowboys still love that. They still love to go out with the wagon. In other words, even today, you don't say, when are you going to start branding? You say, when's the wagon going?
Exactly, and you know exactly what that means.
Exactly, yes.
And you know, that's a country or ranch term, but the wagon, certainly in the trail driving days and in the early ranching days where they'd take the wagon out and put it at the corner of 4 pastures and set up and, as you say, be out for a year, it served a purpose. And it was not only the home for the cowboys, but that's where their food was fixed. And then the pickup came. And the ice chest, and they started running food back and forth from a cook shack to the cowboys, and it was easy and was not only the home for the cowboys, but that's where their food was fixed. And then the pickup came and the ice chest, and they started running food back and forth from a cook shack to the cowboys, and it was easy, and so that's the route they went. But you know, when we started bringing the chuck wagon back, the cowboys loved it. And one rancher, which I won't mention his name, I was talking to him one day, and he said he was mad at me, and this was at the Pitchfork. And I said, what have I done? And he said, well, you brought these chuck wagons back. And he said, I've got to get the chuck wagon out of the barn and hook up the mules. And he said, it's your fault. But that's what the cowboys wanted.
I want to talk about that more when we come back, because the chuck wagons have been a big part of my life too. And so you folks stay with us. We'll be right back in just a minute with more of the story of Tom Perini, and we'll talk about chuck wagons and what they mean to us today. Tom, the chuck wagon consumed 2 winters of my life because Gail bought me a wagon. I really wanted to do that. And I had the diagram of Charlie Goodnight's first chuck wagon, which is in the museum in Canyon at the Panhandle Plains Historical Museum. So I had that I was going to build it exactly like that. But I used Phillips screws and plywood. I didn't know any different. But when I really got to where I knew what I was going to do, she bought me a wagon. And I spent 1 whole winter with that in my shop, building the chuck box and the boot box, and putting on the bow pockets and finding some bows. And I had more fun doing that. And then I built another one the next winter for Buck Reams.
Well, and you know, it is a labor of love because it's expensive, and now when they go in and build them, and I built quite a few wagons, but I look for the right lumber, and I look for the right screw, and a flathead screw, and and finding a square nut bolt. You've got to rob it from, you have to find all this stuff out in the pasture. But when you really do it right, there's a feeling you have about it. And then when you go to competition, and you're there with 20 or 30 other wagons, and they're judging, and that's what they're looking for.
Yes.
They're looking for the Phillips head screw someplace, but it is a labor of love and expensive.
Well, I realized then, in doing that and researching it, that the guys that put those wagons together in the early days just used what was available, what kind of materials were available at the ranch at the time. And the chuck box was designed by the cook, and if he was a short little guy.
Exactly.
He didn't want anything that he had to reach up high to get.
And he knew whether he wanted drawers or boxes or how deep, and that's it. I think that the cook went to the ranch carpenter and said, "This is what I'm looking for," and that's how they. So all of those things are different. I mean, Charles Goodnight's is different from if a short guy or whatever it is.
Well, when we first started our gathering in Fort Worth, which I said is 27 years old now, we had 10 wagons to begin with, and there were only probably 2 or 3 of them that were properly built. The next year we had room for 20, and we had more that were properly built, but we still had, like a person brought in one that was made out of plywood. Mm-hmm. And the boards weren't, there wasn't a 14-inch board on the bottom and a 12-inch on the top. And the chuck wagon cabinet was made out of plastic, and he only lasted 1 year. He didn't come back. But he would, believe it or not, he hauled that wagon all the way from California just so he could compete in the chuck wagon contest.
Well, and you know, it's interesting. Now, they have a big chuck wagon contingent out there. I mean, yes. So we've gone from Texas all the way to California, and all the wagons are a little different. The California wagons are a little different, which it's like the King Ranch wagon. You know, it has a 6 or 8-inch tire on it because of the sand.
Yes.
And our wagons are more narrow. Mm-hmm. But I think they designed the wagon for the purpose where they were and how they were using it. So they're not all going to be the same.
Today we use the chuck wagon and the Dutch ovens and the open fires to cook for folks in all walks of life. And there's something really good about eating outdoors with food that's been cooked over an open fire or in a Dutch oven. And you do so much of that. And tell us some of the places that you've cooked for people that you wouldn't think they'd even know what you were doing.
Well, of course, we've cooked a lot in Washington, D.C. and a lot of ranches, and of course in Washington, if you're doing a party for 1,400, we can't use Dutch ovens.
Sure.
But if you're doing a party for 25 or so, you can. But we have cooked all over. But I agree with you. There's something, you get back to your atmosphere, and whether you're in a steakhouse or whether you're at a wagon, when you have a wagon and a fire and a fly kind of popping and you've got your fires built, a Dutch oven, the food to me tastes better coming out of cast iron. And I don't know if it's the visual part of it, or you know, if the oven, the way it's seasoned, or just the excitement of what you're doing, but it does taste better. And when the cook is cooking it and making the whole thing work.
I remember one year we did a party for all of the lieutenant governors of all the states, all 50 states, came out to our place, and we had all of the lieutenant governors of all the states, all 50 states, came out to our place, and we had a chuck wagon dinner. And they were so impressed. And I remember a lady from Maryland, we had told them in the beginning, now don't put your plate in the pot if you want some dessert, because we don't have dessert plates. And all of a sudden she started crying, and she was just boo-hooing. And I said, "Man, is something wrong?" She said, "I want some dessert," and I threw my plate away. You folks stay with us. We'll be right back with more of the story of Tom Perini, his restaurant, and just about food in general that's cooked outdoors and in Dutch ovens. Hang on, we're coming right back. Tom, you've cooked for people in all walks of life in all parts of our country, especially in some parts of the rest of the world. But like the time I was with you in India at the polo fields, when we did a thing for the Eisenhower Medical Center in Palm Springs. And they hired Cotton Rosser to bring a rodeo pen in. They flew some champion rodeo cowboys in there.
It was fancy.
It was really
nice
fancy.
deal.
Not like the chuck wagon at the ranch. And you had an experience that I know you'll never forget, and I'll never get tired of listening to you tell about it. It was at the White House on 9/11.
President Bush asked us to cater the congressional picnic, which we were thrilled. And we took chuck wagons and all of that up. We had 2 chuck wagons and two quick stories. But when we had met with them prior to our event, the White House staff was talking to us, and the chef at that time, he wanted to know what I was going to fix, and I told him what the president liked, and tenderloin and things, and catfish and things, and catfish, fried catfish, and he said, well, you're in Washington. He said, you have to fix chicken. And I said, no, sir. I said, the beef industry is what's brought me to this, and we're from Texas, and we're fixing beef. And the room went deathly quiet. And I thought, well, this is it. But, so we'd gone up, we'd set up, everything was, we thought, fine. And of course, on 9/11, it all came to a crashing halt. And I shouldn't have used that word, but it was a bad situation. And we knew that we were not going to cater our party, and we had a call from the White House and said, of course the party's canceled, and they said we had prepped food for 1,400 people. And I mean, we'd made bread puddings and had salad torn and things like that. And they said, what should we do? And I said, what do you want me to do? And they said, we really want to feed the firemen and all the extra Secret Service people over at the Pentagon and the White House. And I said, fine, we'll be over. I had mesquite wood and pits, and I said, we'll be over cooking. They said, no, Tom, you can't. We can't have any smoke come up from behind the White House. And you know, I never thought about that, but that's what they were. They didn't want anything to create a problem.
Yes.
And so they cooked all the food, and they did that for all that food went to all the people that were helping at the Pentagon.
That's a wonderful story. And we could sit here all afternoon. You could tell stories about places you've been, people you met because of your ability to cook food that they like to eat. And if they wanted to do some of that for themselves,
yes,
you have a cookbook that's rather successful.
It's been. We did this in 2000, and I don't know exactly, but I think 120,000 copies. I mean, everything in this is simple food that the average person can fix. Yeah. And so it's worked well, and recipes from the Steakhouse, and when we do these parties for the president and those things.